Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. Billy is out today, but we still have a wonderful show that we're going to give to you. We are talking about morels and mushroom and the fabulous world of fungi, which is something that I really enjoy learning about, and I think you will too. A lot of our shows are exciting, but to learn all this and gain all this knowledge, but this one will be even more so, I think. So you'll get to learn how to ID mushrooms and how to actually know what each mushrooms are. Dr. Ellen Crocker is going to be talking about that with us. She is our forest health specialist, but she is also a mushroom extraordinaire. So we are going to have her on, and she has a special guest to talk to you about today. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Dr. Crocker, if you'd like to join us.
Wonderful. Great to be on today.
To the show.
I'm so happy to be here. A great day. Every day is a good day to talk about fungi. But especially now we're getting into the summertime. They're popping up everywhere. We've got mushrooms all over the place.
Right. You know, the thing about it is too, if you can explain a little bit like forest health and mushrooms, how does that go hand in hand, or does it?
Well, that's a good question because, anybody who's been watching the show for a while knows that I like to talk about all the things that can negatively impact trees and forests, whether they're diseases or insects or invasive plants. That's my typical topic of conversation on From the Woods Today, and what I think about as a forest health extension specialist. And some of those things are fungi, and some of those fungi can produce mushrooms. So, some fungi that can cause diseases in trees, whether they are, attacking the roots or causing rot inside the wood, in the roots, can produce mushrooms. So you do get some forest health issues that produce mushrooms. Now you've got a lot, even of the fungi that are there and cause problems, but they aren't the type of fungi that produce mushrooms. You also have mushrooms and the fungi that produce them that benefit trees. So there are some fungi that can hurt trees, some fungi that can benefit them, and a lot of them that are just breaking down dead wood, dead plant tissue. So really those fungi do all sorts of different things, and they do connect up to forest health in that way. And that sometimes you can see those mushrooms and be like, aha, that is causing problems in your tree. Other times, it might be a benefit to the tree. And a lot of times, just people who study forest health and fungi are going to be interested in mushrooms just because fungi are fascinating.
I believe so too. So let's go ahead and get started with your presentation. And, can you let us know what is a mushroom?
Great. So we're going to start out today. Today, we're talking all about mushrooms, and then we're going to focus in on morels in particular. We are just wrapping up morel season for the year in our area. Different areas are going to be different, but we're going to talk a little bit about that with a great guest presenter today, Mr. Byron Meade from University of Pikeville. But before we get to his presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about what are mushrooms, because we're seeing them pop up. And you might be particularly interested in morels if you're joining today. But what are these ephemeral, magical, weird things that we see, the mushrooms? So when most people think about mushrooms, and when you think about a mushroom in your head, if you imagine a mushroom, you might be picturing one of the mushrooms you'd find in the grocery store, especially if you like to eat mushrooms, something like these white button mushrooms or portobello mushrooms. But all mushrooms are created by fungi to do the same thing. So any mushroom that you see is the fruiting body of a fungus. So the goal of the mushroom, and the reason why it's made by the fungus, is to make spores. Those are going to be the reproductive structures of those fungi. The little tiny spores here you can see in this picture, they almost look like dust. Those are the spores of the mushroom that can travel on the wind, in water, being spread by different things. And if they arrive in the right spot, they can germinate and grow and make more fungi. And those fungi then could make more mushrooms, maybe. Now, just a note that not all fungi make mushrooms. In fact, most fungi don't. They will make spores and they'll make structures to reproduce, but a lot of them are going to be tiny, tiny, tiny. They're not going to be mushrooms the way that we're thinking about them. They're going to be more microscopic structures. The ones that produce mushrooms, though, are the ones that we might be interested in and that we're talking about today. First, because they're big and we can see them, but also some of those are delicious and great to eat. And there's many reasons why those are the fungi in particular that people might notice. So again, mushrooms are the fruiting body of a bigger fungus that's doing all the growing and eating and living for that fungus. The mushrooms themselves are the way that they'd reproduce. So we could use the analogy of a tree. So here's an apple tree. And if you imagine this apple tree, you've got the tree itself. Part of it you can see, the branches, the trunk, the leaves. Part of it you can't see, all of the roots that are underground that are just as essential, if not more so, for the health of that tree. And then every now and then, so once a year, this apple tree is going to flower, produce fruits, and inside of those fruits, those apples are the seeds of the apple tree that, if they land somewhere, can grow and germinate and maybe make another apple tree. Fungi are a totally different group of organisms than plants. There's a lot of ways in which they're just completely different. In fact, we're probably more closely related to them than they are to plants. For example, they need to eat a food source. They're not photosynthetic and other things. But if we kind of take this comparison with a fungus, the mushroom would be like the apple. It's the reproductive structure that they're making. In this case, the mushroom produces spores, not seeds, but it's the fruit of that fungus. But what we can't see, but is so essential, is the actual body of that fungus. And we call that the mycelium. That's this network of thread-like structures, these kind of white, webby looking things here. That's going to be growing underground in the soil, maybe through the roots of a plant, maybe in the bark, depending on how it's growing. That's going to be growing through something, breaking that down, feeding on it, absorbing those nutrients, really doing all the work for that fungus. Whereas we might only see the mushrooms. Anytime you see a mushroom, just remember that that's just the fruit. It's producing spores and it's part of this bigger fungal body that you can't really see. That's really the core part of that fungus. So those mushrooms are producing spores and they can look really different. So here's another mushroom that you might see around, a puffball. And here I am poking that puffball so you can see, oh, I can get the spores to come out of it by poking it, those little dust-like spores that are going to travel on the wind and land somewhere. If they land somewhere conducive, the right humidity, the right conditions, they could germinate and grow more of those little fungal hyphae, something like this, that mycelium, that big body of thread-like structures. That's the fungus. And that's key for what mushrooms you get, and where they're going to occur is really related to what fungi are growing there. What are they eating? How do they like to live? What conditions do they like? So what are these fungi doing in the environment? We might see the mushrooms as they grow. And here's another type of fungal fruiting body or mushroom. These look different from your portobello mushrooms or your white button mushrooms, not that stereotypical like single mushroom stem with a cap. But these, which are growing on the side of a log, are also fruiting bodies of a fungus. And you can see in this case, they have these gills, which underneath on that underside are where the spores are going to be produced. And what are they doing? In this case, you can probably guess if it's growing on this log, it's breaking down the woody material in that log. And they are doing one of the most common things that you'll see fungi do in our woods, and that is acting as nature's recyclers. They are going to be breaking down woody material and making it accessible for other things to use, breaking down that cellulose and hemicellulose and lignin, these really complex structures that not a lot of organisms can feed off of and break down. Fungi can. And because of that, they're, can decay wood, but they're also essential in terms of recycling all of those nutrients and creating conditions that are going to be conducive to lots of other organisms living there. Imagine if we didn't have fungi breaking down wood in your woods, it would just all be accumulating and collecting there. So fungi are playing this really essential role as recyclers. And not only are they doing that on logs in the woods, you might see them doing that in your yard. So you could commonly see little mushrooms popping up in your lawn. Now, they can be doing different things. Many of the time, they would just be breaking down dead plant material. Maybe there's some plant tissue underground there. Maybe there's an old root there. Maybe if you've got mulch and you've seen something like this, all the white fluffy stuff in your mulch, that's all fungi. And what are they doing? They're breaking down woody material, just like you saw with that log. In this case, they're in your mulch instead, breaking down that woody material. Now, on the one hand, you might think, well, shoot, that means I'm going to have to get more mulch over time as they break it down. On the other hand, as they're doing that, they're improving the quality of the soil and having a number of benefits. And these aren't things that are going to maybe hurt your plants or other things that are there. They're just feeding on the dead wood. You might also see this. Here's another common mushroom that's breaking down some dead wood. This is an oyster mushroom, and it's one of the species that is commonly cultivated as well. While you can find it out in the wild on a tree trunk, if there's a little pocket of dead tissue on downed logs, people can also grow that intentionally and eat those oyster mushrooms. So that's one thing that our fungi are doing. What's another thing that they're doing? Well, let's say that they're not feeding off of dead plant tissue, but off of living plant tissue. Well, they might be pathogens of those plants, and in this case, trees, causing disease. This is a mushroom called the jack-o'-lantern mushroom, and I don't know if you can see in this picture, but what's happening is you can see kind of this string of little clusters of mushrooms that are all in a line going back to the base of the tree, the trunk of the tree. And what's happening there is that they are feeding on the roots of that tree. They're causing decay, breaking down tissue. And that's why you see them in the line. There's a root right underneath it that they're all kind of tapped into and feeding off of. So imagine underground, you've got this network of those hyphae, that mycelium of thread-like structures that are decaying that wood and feeding off of it. So that's another thing that fungi can do, and you'll sometimes see mushrooms or fruiting bodies that are doing that. Things like this mushroom. Here's another one that I commonly see in our area at the base of oak trees called oak bracket fungus. Now, this doesn't look much like a mushroom, right? It looks like a weird blob at the base of a tree. Nonetheless, that is the fruiting body of that mushroom. It's producing spores to spread that mushroom to new spots. And what's happening there is that the fungus itself is living on the roots of the tree, at the base of the tree, in the wood there, causing decay. And here's another very common one in our area. Some of these cracked cap polypores that you'd see on locust trees. And, those will move in on an old branch wound. Wounds on trees are just a recipe for decay fungi. They are a great entry point for those fungi getting in and breaking down some of that wood. Typically, a tree's bark is pretty good at keeping those things out, but once you've had some wounding, like in this case, an old branch wound, that fungi can get in and cause more decay there. And then what you'll see with this one is this is the mushroom, this is the fruiting body of the fungus. And every year it gets a little bit bigger and adds another layer on. And right here, you've got a pore structure, tiny little pores, and the spores are formed in those. And you'll also see fungi that are pathogens in turf, like this one. There are even fungi that are pathogens of humans and of animals, but they don't produce mushrooms, and we're not going to talk about them today. But the other thing that fungi and mushrooms are doing is acting as mutualists. So these are fungi that have a beneficial relationship with plants. So the plant is photosynthetic and it's getting sunlight. And the fungus is growing through the ground, getting nutrients, access to other kind of water and important essential nutrients that the tree might need. And they form this partnership, this really close relationship where the fungus, depending on the fungus, might actually grow all around the roots of that plant, and in some cases, even inside of it, and benefit the plant while the plant is benefiting the fungus. So this is one that commonly forms those types of relationships. At Russula, you'll see them all over in our woods, but what you're not seeing is what's happening underground. So imagine you see the mushrooms over here and the tree over here, but underground, the roots of that tree are connected to the the fungus. Its mycelium is going to be growing all over and kind of really changing things for that tree. Here's a picture of a little pine tree seedling. You can see its roots here in this kind of yellowish color, but all that white thread-like structure is the fungus that has this mycorrhizal relationship with that tree. Not only is that hugely important in terms of our forest dynamics and the health of those trees in that context, but there are many mycorrhizal fungi that we like to eat. And for those of us who are mushroom hunters, some of the most commonly foraged species are mycorrhizal. So they are fungi that have these close relationships with trees, these beneficial relationships with trees, including some things like truffles. If you've ever had the good fortune to have some truffles shaved on your pasta, very high value species that form mycorrhizal relationships with trees. And of course, what we're going to be talking about today, morels. Most of the morel species that you'd be thinking of are mycorrhizal, and they have mycorrhizal relationships, these beneficial symbiotic relationships with trees. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to hear from Mr. Byron Meade a little bit about morels. What are they and where can we find them? And even how could you maybe grow them? Because growing mycorrhizal fungi has always been a challenge. Imagine you need to grow the fungus and its host, and it can be really complicated. But more recently, there's been some great developments in terms of growing morels, and he's going to give you the inside scoop on some of the work that he's doing there at University of Pikeville, testing out some of those techniques. So with that, I'm going to stop my presentation and see if we have any questions about that first part that we discussed.
Well, thank you, Ellen. I greatly appreciate that. And someone did ask and said, should anything be done to protect the tree?
And I think that might have been from when we were talking about decay fungi and tree pathogens. And so when it comes to decay fungi and fungi that are really opportunistically feeding on trunks of trees and roots of trees, there are fungi out there that can throw a wrench in your plans and attack even healthy trees. I think one of the best examples of that is not really a decay fungus, but if you think of something like chestnut blight that has wiped out American chestnuts, chestnuts used to be one of the most dominant trees in the southern Appalachian forests, but this invasive fungus came in and has killed those big trees. We still find chestnuts. There are lots of them out there, but they tend to have more of a shrub form because as soon as they get big enough, that fungus will kill them. And that's an invasive species that those trees aren't accustomed to. Now, there's a lot of awesome work being done to bring back the American chestnut and to fight this invasive disease. And if you're interested, there's a great group, the Kentucky chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation, that's doing some fabulous work for American chestnut. Now, you'll see similar invasive fungi that have caused problems for our trees. And there's, invasive vascular pathogens that are impacting the tree's ability to move water around. There's pathogens that are going to impact the leaves. But if we're talking decay fungi, which is all those pictures I showed, the things that are breaking down the wood in the trunk of the tree, at the base of the tree, and in the roots, those are frequently opportunistic. They take advantage of conditions when they're presented. If the tree is wounded and those fungal spores get on it, they can start moving into the wood. So the best thing you can do to protect a tree from damage like that is to prevent wounding to your trees. Even something as small as mower damage or a weed whacker or something like that. You'd think, my tree is huge. How could this weed whacker damage it? That's a
Mm-hmm.
perfect entry point for those fungi to bypass the bark, the normal defense system, and get into the wood of the tree where the tree isn't able to defend itself as well. So the best thing you can do to protect your tree from decay fungi would be protecting your tree, preventing any unnecessary damage. And then when, damage does occur, let's say a branch, you have a storm, a branch comes out, or you need to prune that tree, proper pruning cuts can help the tree seal off the damage that was there, seal off any potential fungi.
So at the bottom of the tree, though, mulch around it, would that be a good
Mulch
weed
is
whackers?
great because it prevents you from having to weed whack right around your tree. In addition, it's going to create the perfect conditions for the base of the tree, for the roots to grow, for other things to grow there and build up that soil. Now, you don't want to pile the mulch up around the base of the tree because then you run into a whole separate set of problems where that trunk should be above ground. And if it's below ground, you can also have fungal problems with that moisture held right there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can do a lot to protect your trees.
Well, that one mushroom actually looked like it was just growing the bark out. Because the top of it actually looked like the bark. Was that actually the bark, or is it just a?
No, that's the mushroom, and it feels like wood. It feels
Oh,
hard and woody as well. We did have a question about should wounds on the tree be covered with some sealant? And for the most part, while there are exceptions to this, so there's no, one size fits all approach. For the most part, it's actually been found that many of those sealants prevent the tree from the natural processes that it would be doing to seal off the damage. Trees don't heal. They're not like us. They can't kind of heal that wound efficiently, but they do seal off damaged areas, and that prevents fungi from being able to get past them. And so, what you really want to do is facilitate the tree's ability to defend itself in that process. So, for the most part, not only are those sealants not necessary, in some cases they can actually be detrimental. I'd
mhm.
encourage folks to reach out to and work with a knowledgeable arborist if they have particular questions about their tree and what the best approach is.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. All right. I guess we will now move on to all the morels.
Yes, and so we're going to hear from Byron Meade, who is an assistant professor of biology at University of Pikeville,
Mhm.
and he was hoping to be with us here today in person, but he's dealing with some sick kiddo issues, so we're going to have to take a rain check on that. But don't worry, Mr. Meade shared his presentation with us, and we can learn a lot from him about morels. There at UPike, he teaches many classes, but one class in particular on mushrooms and molds. And his students get to grow a lot of mushrooms and do many different things. In addition, he has a very active research program looking at all sorts of things mushroom related.
Hmm.
So, one of the things that he'll be talking about today is some of his research looking at how to grow some of these challenging mycorrhizal species like morels. And he also has a truffle program growing and many other cool things happening. We're clearly going to have him on again in the future,
Definitely.
but appreciate him joining us today, even though he can't be here in person.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Byron Meade. I'm an assistant professor of biology from the University of Pikeville. And if you're getting the video in this format, I'm going to go ahead and apologize that we're not live. My kiddos are down and out with the flu. So hopefully this recording answers some of your questions, but if not, please feel free to reach out to me at my email provided there. I'd like to thank UK and everybody watching. And hopefully, you guys will learn some stuff, and we're going to demystify the elusive morel. So let's get started. First, kind of what are morels? Um, this question pops up quite a bit for me. what constitutes something being a morel or if it's a different species. So morels are just a type of edible mushroom in the genus Morchella. Now, there's a lot of morels. We're going to get to that in a future slide. Um, Morels are ascomycetes, so they actually belong to the group of sac-forming fungi. So they're a little different than a typical mushroom. When we think of like a portobello mushroom or a white button mushroom, an oyster mushroom, those are basidiomycetes. And so a morel is actually an ascomycete. And the real difference here is just where they store their spores, right? And so for most people, it's probably not important, but depending on how deep you want to go in this in this field of study, it could be important for you. As everybody probably knows, morels fruit in the spring after some warm weather and some good seasonal spring rains. And they're one of, if not the most popular forage mushroom. I feel pretty confident that I can say that morels are the most popular forage mushroom. So if we look at the image here, we'll actually see some different groups of fungi, and so there's all different kinds, right? And what we're talking about is really over here where the arrow is pointing, this Ascomycota. So this includes other things like truffles, some of the elf cups, so lots of things over here. And then the Basidiomycota, it looks like they have a reishi here, a Ganoderma, but the Basidiomycota include a lot of your typical mushrooms that may pop into your head when you think about what a mushroom looks like. So, how do we identify morels? Because that's really important. Now, thankfully, morels are one of the more beginner-friendly mushrooms to identify, but there are some things to look out for. So, in general, morel mushrooms will have this honeycomb-like cap. So they from a distance, they almost look like a pine cone laying there. But they have this little cap that has pits and ridges that are very pronounced. They're very easy to tell. If you cut them open, they're hollow from the tip to the stem, most of them. So that's a good tip to look at. And the cap is going to be attached directly to the stem. We'll have some pictures in just a second to help you see this. And it's important to look at another genus of closely related fungi, the Gyrometria. Now, the Gyrometras, they look very similar to the untrained eye to morels, and there's a lot of discussion about whether or not they are edible. Okay, so we'll get into that in just a minute too. So this is a beautiful cross section here from Michigan State, and this shows pretty well what we're talking about when we're talking about a morel. You can see they have these deep pits and these tall ridges, and actually inside of this is where those asci, those spore-bearing structures would be at. And so things like Sarcosypha, the little red elf cups, if you actually blow on some of those, you'll see the spores jettison from those asci structures in here. If you cut them open, you'll see that sometimes it looks kind of powdery or cottony in there, but they're hollow all the way through. And then right here, you'll see that the cap is actually connected to the base, which is a pretty important feature. So most morels are going to look like that, right? They're really easy to tell, and the cross section usually gives up any culprits that are misidentified. But you have some things like these Gyrometra species that look very similar. There's also other things. Havella, the elf saddles look pretty similar, but really the Gyrometrias here are the ones you really want to look for. So sometimes they'll be referred to as false morels. Now, false morels is a common name that's going to get applied to a lot of different mushrooms that look morel-esque. Okay, and so what we're looking for here, these mushrooms are going to have irregular, weird, lobed, wrinkly, smushed-looking melted caps. They just look off. Okay, now some of the Gyrometria do have some toxins, right? Gyrometria esculenta could have some hydrazine toxins, and so they can be harmful if consumed. However, and this is a beautiful image by the Bluegrass Mycological Society, which is a fantastic organization. You can find them on social media, and they do a lot of really great work here. A lot of the Gyrometria are edible when cooked, and this when cooked is a very important disclaimer here, okay, guys? Because even morels can be toxic if they're not cooked properly. So you definitely want to cook your mushrooms. As a matter of fact, you want to cook almost all of your mushrooms, not just morels, but cook the mushrooms, and that will actually denature any toxins that are in the morels, right? They're not thermophilic, so they will break down under heat, which is important. So some of the geometries, and you see them here. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. And this is really, you probably don't want to mess with these if you're not a seasoned forager, because you do have some, like I said, this Geometria esculenta group over here, again, all called false morels, right? This one is not known to be in Kentucky, but it is toxic, right? So you probably, just as a safe bet, just avoid all of these, right? Go for the morels that you know are going to be safe to consume. And when in doubt, always verify. Verify, verify, verify. And verify from more than one person, okay? Go to some people who know their mushrooms and get multiple verifications that it is what you think it is before you cook it, okay? Now, one mushroom here that we'll look at, this early morel, this is actually a verpa. Verpas were also considered toxic for a long time. And sometimes you'll see these called the early morel. Now, look at this, right? Look at the cap. You'll see the same thing, deep pits, high ridges, right? Looks very similar to this. And what I've noticed is these early morels, usually they're quite small. And so, even when you look at them from a distance, you're like, is that a verpa? Is that one of these early morels? Or is it just a smaller morchella that hasn't fully grown yet, right? Um, but these can be just fine when you cook them, right? Just make sure you cook them. So there's a lot of morels, right? There's a lot. We usually break those down into clades or groups, and I'll talk about those groups in just a minute. But here's a good phylogenetic tree that it's shown a lot of these. Now, some of these are important, like you see here. This is Morchella esculenta. This is one of the yellow morels right here, and so you can see this esculenta clade. And this is what you're going to find most of here in Kentucky. You will find some of these Elata clades up here, but not as, in my experience anyway, and this could be just anecdotal, a lot of these esculenta. Now, there are some important ones that are in other places here. Morchella importuna, right? This is a cultivated morel, and I'm going to talk about how you actually grow morels. Yes, you can grow them. No, it's not Photoshop. You can do it. It's just kind of hard. And Rufo Brunea down here is also one that can be grown. Okay. So, when people talk about morels around here, you're going to hear people say yellow morels, and they'll talk about black morels, and sometimes you'll see these half-free morels. Okay. And so the yellow morels is again, it's going to be these esculentas, right? Morchella americana, Prava. So there's a couple of these, right? And they're going to be the ones that look visually the most like the kind of the yellow morel. And we can spend a whole day talking about these clades and why they are the way that they are, but that's maybe outside of the purview of this particular talk. So for now, we'll just say that there's these three big clades in Kentucky that you're going to most likely encounter. Black morels, Morchella angusticeps is a big one. Morchella brunea is another one. And then the half-free morels, Morchella punctipes. And this one does come up quite a bit here, this half-free. And now, again, oops, sorry. Again, you may run into this Morchella importuna. It's the one that my lab cultivated. And so this is one that's routinely cultivated around the world. And then Morchella rufo brunea can also be cultivated. And you'll see this pop up. This can pop up in Kentucky in landscaping and things like that. So both of these are becoming a little bit more cosmopolitan in their dispersal. Right. So how do we find morels? That's always people are always like, where do you find these at? And what I would say to you is learn your trees, right? Learn your trees. All the botanists are right. They're very important. You need to know them. American elms and elms in general, right? And we have some pictures, I think, of these, but if not, just Google these, spend some time, learn to ID your trees, and that skill will carry over for a lot of other outdoor activities, not just morel hunting. So American elm, any of your Fraxinus species, your ash species, and unfortunately for us, most ash species the population are kind of in decline because of emerald ash borers. But on the flip side of that, the decline in the tree also seems to be providing more food for the morel. So we actually get more morels. Old apples, old apple orchards, old orchards of any kind really seem to be pretty prolific producers. Particularly, you'll see around the drip line of trees, which is very interesting, right? And when we talk about the cultivation of morels, you'll kind of see why. But I can tell you that I have a morel hunting spot that is a bunch of elm trees, and it's an old orchard. Looks like the only trees that are left are kind of these elm trees, and then it was kind of maintained as a hunting plot or a pasture. And I find loads and loads and loads of these Morchella esculentas, and they're at the drip line of these American elm trees. So that holds true. Hickories, hickories, tulip poplars, sycamores, white pines. And so you need to learn these trees, but also know, I mean, like, look at this, right? You have elms, you have ashes, you have hickories, tulip poplar, sycamore. It's like, well, congratulations. It's pretty much all of Eastern North American forest, right? And so really you can find morels in a lot of places. If you want to hedge your bets, right, if you're trying to find those really good places, I typically look for places that hold some water, either a kind of riparian areas here with the sycamores, um, or places that have kind of these swags in the hill that have some wet seeps in them, places that hold some moisture because the mushrooms do need some moisture in order to fruit, right? These old apple orchards are a great place for that too. So a couple more tips. Um, Morels need they need the soil to start warming in order to form primordia. And that formation of primordia is going to kick off about 4 to 6 inches into the soil, right? So you can get a little probe and you put the probe in the ground, and it'll tell you what the temperature is, 4 to 6 inches down. So you really want to start looking, when it's this 50 to 60 degree mark in the soil, start looking. Wait for some rain, right? Now, these are mushrooms. They need a lot of water. So if it's been really dry, it doesn't matter how warm the soil is. If there's no moisture around, you're probably not going to find morels. Or if you do find morels, they're going to be dried out and quite stressed. You can even see some red stem infections on them. So, the mushrooms can also be infected with things. It's not harmful to us, but, it can kill out the crops. Um, I had a friend tell me this one, an old timer who still is a fantastic morel hunter, and he doesn't do anything with the soil. He can just look at areas that start to green up first. And why do they green up first? Well, they green up first because they hold some moisture typically, right? And so low-lying areas, things like that. So when you start seeing these places, particularly along riverbanks, old logging roads, edges of fields, when they start to green up in the spring, you probably want to start being out there walking around a little bit. And another tip is change your elevation. Okay. It may be 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit in the soil at 400 feet elevation, but at 1,200 feet elevation, it could be totally different. And that's something that, particularly in Pike County and your eastern counties, when you start having some pretty significant elevation change, play with that elevation. Just because the season's over down low or up high doesn't mean that it's over everywhere. Change your elevation. Some basic foraging ethics and safety. Take only what you need, right? If you're not going to prepare the morels, don't take all of them. It probably doesn't hurt the organism, the actual morel itself. The mycelial body is big enough that it's probably going to survive that just fine. And chances are it's already released enough spores that whatever damage you've done to it by harvesting the fruit body is probably insignificant. However, lots of animals are macrophages, slugs, snails, turtles, insects, right? If you've harvested morels before, you see all the little bugs that come out of them. So that morel is a food source to a large chunk of the environment, the ecosystem. So take only what you're going to consume. If you can, leave some mushrooms behind to reproduce. There is some merit to if you're harvesting morels. You know, Kind of the old saying was to use an old onion sack. Use some sack with a net or a basket. That way, the spores, as you're walking, if they are in a spore drop, the spores are being able to get back onto the forest floor. So you're kind of mechanically spreading some of those. Make sure you get permission if you're on private land or if you're in a national forest, state forest, check your local regulations, okay? Not every forest or park in Kentucky allows for foraging. So please make sure that you do your part and check and see if you're actually allowed to forage there. And you also want to kind of avoid polluted areas. I see all the time, I'll see pictures that people will post on social media of a beautiful batch of morels right on the side of the road. Please avoid consuming those. Mushroom mycelium, that white fluffy part, the actual organism itself, is I like to refer to the mycelium as quite sticky. It will readily absorb heavy metals and toxins. And so if you're finding morels around polluted areas, just know that there's a pretty decent chance that the pollution is actually in the mycelium and it's going to bioaccumulate, right? So you want to avoid those. I know it's hard enough to find the morels, and I know you don't want to leave them, but please, it's probably not worth the risk. How do you clean them? Now, there's some people go back and forth on this, right? Do you soak them? Do you not soak them? And honestly, I got to tell you, sometimes I don't, sometimes I do, right? But morels are buggy little mushrooms. I'll tell you that. You think they're clean, and when you soak them, you'll see all the little bugs come out. The trick here is if you do soak them, and I'm going to suggest that you probably do to get all the little critters out. Um, Rinse them in some cool water after the salt water. It doesn't even need to be salt water. You can just rinse them in normal water. Make sure you dry them before you use them, right? Mushrooms, again, are like big sponges, right? If you soak them in water for a long time, then go throw them straight into the pan, you'll actually have to wait for them to expel all of that water. So pat them dry or let them air dry before you do anything with them. You can preserve morels. Actually, these dried morels here are probably Morchella importuna. And so a very common one, I know at least here in the eastern part of the state, you can go to most grocery stores and find these now. You can dry them. You can freeze them. I like to flash freeze them. There's other methods too, but these are kind of the big ones, right? You can freeze them. You can actually cook them first and then freeze them. You can freeze them in the blocks of but you can do lots of things with them, right? You can freeze them in a sauce, store them in the sauce. You can do lots of stuff with them, but you always want to make sure that you do that they are cooked or that they're going to be cooked, right? What you don't want to do is if you dry them at a really, really, really low temperature and put them in a seasoning salt, right? That may not be enough heat to actually denature the toxins found in the morels. So you want to make sure, however you're preserving them, that you do plan to cook them fully before ingesting. And like most mushrooms, right? You store them away from light and away from moisture. They will absorb moisture in storage too, so make sure that you keep them kind of desiccated or dried out. All right, now this is the one I'm sure everybody wants to know. How do you grow them? I'm going to tell you step by step what you need to grow them. Now let me preface that it is hard. We were able to successfully cultivate some of them this year, but we only got a handful, right? We had lots of aborted mushrooms. If you're going to try this, outdoor cultivation is the easier way to go, but you can do it indoors. My lab is working on that right now. But let's talk about outdoor because I think that's much more accessible for most people. Okay. So you need to select an area. Preferably a high tunnel. Now you can use a smaller caterpillar tunnel, or what we done with our research site was actually a small PVC kind of hoop house that was quite small, right? You do want to weed the area. Now you can follow this along with some of the articles that I've posted as references here in this presentation, but make sure you get rid of all the weeds, right? You want to pull them up, you want to spray some herbicide on them, and then you want to make sure that you cover up the soil with some dark sheeting because you don't want any germination, okay? You don't want the morels to be competing with the weeds, okay? So after we've selected a site and we've cleared out all of the herbaceous material, we want to put plastic down, smother them out. Right. So we're going to till the soil up about 6 inches deep, and you're going to form these rows here. And you can actually see this here. A lot of people see these on social media, and they think that these are Photoshop, but they're not, right? So we have these rows. This is called the exogenous nutrient bag technique, by the way. You can Google that and find some information. So till them up into rows, and you'll lay irrigation in these rows, okay? You're going to form these beds here, beds. This is the size that we followed. This is following research published by Penn State. So this is all published. You can go find it. You want to apply a 3 to 4 centimeter layer of topsoil over the top of each bed. That's kind of fresh. You can see a really good example here of what we call these nutrient bags. I'll show you the recipe for these in just a minute, but you'll see this is Morchella. This actually looks like a Rufo Brunea, but it could also be Importuna. But you make these beds, we're going to lay some irrigation. So spawning, right? We need to make we need to make some spawn. We're going to apply, this is what we done in our experiment, but you could change these. Apply 230 or 2,386 grams of grain per plot. You're going to spread that out, and then you want to mix that into the topsoil. And I have the spawn recipe in just a second, so you can look at that. Okay. Now you need to make some nutrient bags too, okay? You're going to let the spawn set for a little bit, and we'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. But you need to be making these nutrient bags too. The spawn and the nutrient bags they need to be created in a sterile environment. Right now, it says unicorn bags here. Those are just self-sealing mushroom cultivation bags. If you're familiar with the mushroom cultivation industry, it's kind of the standard. But you need to do all this in a sterile environment. Okay, very, very, very important. So you're going to prepare these nutrient bags, autoclave them, let them cool, and basically what you're going to do is you're going to cut an X or a slash in the bag and lay it face down on the plot 7 days after spawning. Okay, it's very important. At 7 days, you put these nutrient bags, and the idea here is that the mycelium from the morel is going to shoot up into the bags and use those bags as a fuel source, for the next 120 days or so. We want to maintain moisture, so we're going to lay some drip irrigation, make sure that it's there, and then we want to cover the entire plot with some black plastic sheeting because, again, we want to maintain humidity, and we don't want the ground to dry out or get too hot, so we want some shading. Some of those images before had shade cloth on them, and here you can see that, right? Shade cloth. And so in this picture, you'll see the nutrient bags there, and you'll see all the morels kind of tufted out around it. And as a matter of fact, over here, you can actually see that's the mycelium from the morels. It's very common when you pull the plastic back, you'll see this mycelium everywhere. It looks like a little white mold, and sometimes you'll even see some primordia. Now, interestingly here in this picture, and I actually didn't see this when I put it on the slide, you'll see these little baby morels here. Hopefully you can see my cursor down in the bottom left-hand corner. You'll see some red at the base. That's red stem disease, and so that's a common problem you're going to have with cultivated morels, right? It's this red stem disease, and we're still trying to figure out how to solve those problems. Here's the ingredients per spawn bag. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this. You can read this here, but this is how you make the spawn bag, and then this is how you make it's called the ENB. It's the exogenous nutrient bag. So how do you make the bags that you add on top of the dirt? So just follow this recipe. Again, you can follow this recipe, make those bags, apply it to a high tunnel, and see what you get. Right now, it is difficult to do, and there's lots of problems with little critters, mice and voles and things like that, trying to get in there and munch on your morels, slugs. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done in this area, but it is quite possible. Now, I have this image here because it takes about 160 days after you spawn to actually start gaining some traction. After 160 days, we jerk the plastic sheeting off and we remove all the nutrient bags. Now, this is important. We've done a couple of things here. One, we've just exposed it to sunlight, really exposed it to sunlight, which is important because light initiates pinning, and that's what we want. We want the primordia to form, the little mushroom pins. And now we've changed environmental conditions a lot. And then we remove the nutrient bags, which is important because now you're triggering the fungi to go into their sexual reproductive cycle. You're stressing them out, right? They think that, oh my gosh, we may be about to die. So we need to make reproductive structures ASAP. And that's what we're doing, right? We're tricking them. Fruiting typically begins, you'll start to see over here on C here, you'll see these little tiny white pins. Those are little baby mushrooms. We call them primordia. You'll see them starting to pop up about 100 to 185 days after spawning. And that was pretty much on the money for the mushrooms that we harvested. And again, we didn't get many. We had a lot of that red stem rust and lots of aborts, and then a whole legion of slugs that munched on some of our others. But it is possible. It's difficult. But if you have questions about it, please feel free to reach out to me. This is the last slide, so I want to say it here. Reach out to me, email me. I'm happy to walk you through it and help with site recommendations and preparations. Just let me know. And I'll say one more thing before I stop. I know I've actually ran a little bit longer than anticipated, but it's important to get the right mating type with these morels. So fungi have these mating types. They have lots of different mating types. Not all mating types are created equal in terms of pinning and actually producing mushrooms. So check the literature, find sources that have confirmed their mating types. Um, and so you want to make sure that you're getting mating types that will actually work. For our research, we used Morchella importuna, mating type WC1022. You can get that directly from Penn State, and they'll be sure to send you that particular mating type. Okay. There's other ones that work. That's the one we used. You may want that information. Thanks a lot for listening to the presentation. Sorry I'm not here in person to answer any questions you might have, but please, 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 if you have questions, get in touch. I'm happy to talk. So,
All right. Wonderful. And a big thank you again to Byron for his excellent presentation, sharing his expertise with us. Even though he couldn't be here in person, he recorded this for us last night. So, just a big shout out to him and the exciting things he's doing.
Yes, definitely. It felt like he was here. It was wonderful. I really appreciated that. I know he does several different kinds of mushrooms, so maybe we'll get him on with, where hopefully nothing will happen where his kids are sick. So big shout out to them. Hopefully they're feeling a little better today. But we greatly appreciate him being on and telling us all about the morels. That was
Yeah.
very
And, for the longest time, if people have asked me about morel cultivation, and I said, oh, you're better off, cultivating some good woods and then maybe they'll grow morels. And so
right.
it's really exciting to have Byron experimenting with the cultivation practices and kind of what works for us in our area. I know he's doing some similar things with some different mushrooms, so we'll have to have him on again soon. And
Well,
then I also wanted to put a big shout out. If you watch today's show and you're thinking, wow, I love mushrooms. I want to learn more. I want to get involved. There's a great local group called the Bluegrass Mycological Society. You can find them online. You can connect with them on social media as well as sign up for their newsletter. If you think that mushrooms are amazing, if you have pictures of mushrooms you want to get identified, you can post those in their Facebook group and connect with other mycophiles. But even better, this weekend is their big annual foray. So if
oh,
you are looking for something fun to do this weekend, they have a big foray, so a mushroom hunt and identification party there at the Breaks Interstate Park. And you can connect with others, some mushroom experts, as well as just enthusiasts and people who share your passion. So if you want to learn more, you couldn't do better than that.
yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah, that would be really, really neat if you love mushrooms. That would be a good way to learn more about it. Yeah,
Excellent.
wonderful. Okay, well, we greatly appreciate you joining us today and really appreciate you, Dr. Crocker and Byron, being here. Really loved the presentation and really enjoy everything that we learned.
Yeah, thank you. I look forward to joining again.
Yes, thank you. All right. So, if you have any questions, you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com and fill out a little survey, and we will give you some information there, and you'll fill that out. If you find something in your woods that you're just like, oh, I really want to know what this is, you can go ahead and just take a picture, send it to us, and we will try to get those answered. Maybe it's a mushroom that you find. So we really appreciate you joining us today. And if there's any questions you have, you can email me at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we will try to get those answered as well. If you have any show ideas, please let us know. We will definitely want to hear from you about that. And remember, don't forget after this, do that little survey, especially if you want to get on, get some reminders about the show. So again, all of our shows are on fromthewoodstoday.com. You can watch every previous episode that we've ever had on there. And then this week's will probably be on early next week. So we thank you for joining us and take care. Bye.
From the woods today. From the woods today.